Hello and welcome to your homework. So this homework is on crime and punishment again, and this time we're looking at prison. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a 12-mark question. So in this particular homework, you might pause the video at different points to actually write some of the 12 marker as you go along. It might help with the structure, it might help with your thinking. The first section of the video, I'm just going to talk through a little bit about prison, and then we'll make a T table. We'll get the for and against arguments, and that's probably at the different places where you can pause it to start writing your answers as you go along. So my expectation is you'll create the T tables as you'll see them as they appear. You'll have some notes ready to go, and you'll write the answer all within this homework. Okay, so this again, homework is always set for half an hour. So this should take you half an hour from beginning to end. I imagine most of you have put me on speed 1.5 by now anyway. Okay, so here is the question. And it is prison is the best way to deal with criminals. Now, of course, I say question, but it's really just a statement. Okay, and now the idea of a 12 marker is you're going to write, you're going to evaluate the statement. So you're going to judge it and you're going to explain why some people like it, and you're going to refer to religious arguments for why they might like it. And then you're going to refer to why other people have a different point of view. And then at the end, we're going to reach a justified conclusion. It's going to be fairly straightforward. You've already covered this. So, again, this is basically revision. So, no new information really. If you were taught by other teachers, they might use different examples or use language slightly differently. But 90% of this is going over stuff we've already learned. So, sounds silly, but let's just start with the purpose of prison. And the purpose of prison is protection. Okay, the first purpose of prison is protection, and it's keeping society safe by removing dangerous people. Sometimes I think get caught up in reformation, deterrence, and retribution and what it does for the prisoner. But a lot of the time, we're putting people in prison because they're a danger to society. So the first thing prison does is keep the public safe. And it's really important not to lose sight of that when you're writing your essays. Now, as I mentioned, we can talk about the aims of punishment. And reformation is probably the strongest argument for prison out of the three, and we'll look at them. But reformation helps criminals change through education and support. Okay. And just here, it's just a tiny image. You're not going to have to copy this or read this, but I put this here. There's a prison program called the Clink, and this prison program is really very effective. Basically, it takes people who are in prison and it trains them in becoming chefs and gives them the skills and gives them the training that means that when they leave prison, they can actually go directly into work. Now, the Clink program has great results. Okay, so 90% of people who complete the program never reoffend. Now, I actually haven't written this statistic down, I don't think. So you're going to have to make a note here that 48% of people who leave prison go back within 3 years. So 48% of people in the UK who go to prison reoffend and go back to prison within 3 years. So a lot of people who go to prison once will go to prison twice, and there are some people that are always in and out of prison. Okay, but if someone gets the chance to do a program like the Clink Prison Program, then there's a really good chance that they won't actually end up back in prison. You can, at your own time, you can just search the Clink Prison Program. There's loads of videos about it. There's loads of information about it. It's really interesting. So that's the Clink Catering Prison Program. So when you look it up, type in what's in the underline there, and it will pop up. Okay, prisons do offer courses in training and help people change. Everything from the real basics, from reading and writing, all the way up to degrees. Okay, I mean, there are other types of programs in prison. People learn how to do things like trades and learn other skills. But some people simply, unfortunately, because of their upbringing and their lack of opportunities, perhaps have got a really basic reading age. And so, even if we can do the basics, like help someone learn to read, then potentially that removes those challenges and that progresses into more criminal behavior. Okay, So prison also offers people the chance to change their habits and give up addictions such as drugs and alcohol. Okay, so a huge number of people are in prison because they have addictions, and those addictions have led to them having to spend time in prison. Now, that can be anything from someone who has a drug addiction and therefore is dealing in drugs, all the way across to someone who's got an alcohol addiction who drives their car and causes death by dangerous driving. So, alcohol and drugs, for a variety of reasons, can be the reason why someone ends up in prison. And also, it can be the place where they can change, where they've realized that it's their habits that have got them into this difficult situation. And if they change those habits, then they may never reoffend. So, reformation is probably the strongest argument for why prison is a good thing. Uh, Retribution, yeah, definitely. Offenders are punished in proportion to their crimes. So, if we're saying why is prison a form of retribution? Well, because if you do something small, you spend a small amount of time in prison. If you do something bad, you spend longer in prison. So basically, the length of sentence is determined by the crime. Then you've got deterrence. The aim is fairly simple. The aim is to put people off offending by committing similar crimes by making sure everyone gets this punishment of prison. If I'm really honest with you, retribution and deterrence are not the greatest arguments for prison at all. So, um, reformation is the better argument for prison, really. Um, It's subjective, though. Now, I've put it in this red box. Now, what that basically means is I'm going to have to give you this information here, and then I have to move across to the other side. So you've got all this information here. It's all there. You can pause the video here to write your notes, and then we'll move on. Okay, so I'm just going to move across a little bit, and then we're going to pop our T table in. So standard T table, and we'll do our for and against prison. Now, obviously, in the fourth section, it keeps the public safe. And what I thought I would do is I would do arguments for why prison is better than capital punishment, then arguments for why prison is better than corporal punishment. Because in this essay, if we go back to the essay over here, prison is the best way to deal with criminals. Well, you're potentially going to talk about the ideas of corporal punishment and capital punishment as alternatives. So that's why I've done it this way. So when we're talking about why is prison better than capital punishment or putting people to death? Well, the first one is chance of reformation. Prison allows time for offenders to reflect, reform, and potentially change their behaviour. Now, let's say you commit the crime of murder when you are 15 years old or 18 years old, and you spend 30 years in prison and you've changed. You're a different person. The person that entered prison is not the person that's left prison. And there are some people that would argue that if someone has changed and they've become a different person entirely, then they should have the right to start again. Now, not everyone's going to agree with that argument. I guess it's one of those ones where it depends if you're the victim or not. But reformation, if you put someone to death, they can never really change. Whereas if they go to prison, there's a chance they could change and maybe tell their story to other people and help other people not make the same mistakes. And you know, that comes back to this point again, dead people can't change. This is the classic one though. What if you've made a mistake? What if you put someone to death who turns out to be innocent? Misjustices do happen and people do get wrongly imprisoned. And actually, if you put someone in prison and it turns out they didn't do the crime, at least you can release them. They may have lost time and there might be challenges that come to being in prison, but they've still got their life. But if you put someone to death who didn't do the crime, well, it's difficult to bring them back after they've been dead for more than about a minute. So probably um, this is one of the reasons that the UK got rid of the death sentence. Okay, arguments for prison over corporal punishment, so caning and whipping, so those physical ones. Well, firstly, physical punishments can be seen as degrading and cruel. Okay. Prison is more in line with modern views of dignity and human rights, focusing on reformation, not just pain. All right. Um, and then, secondly, corporal punishment may encourage more violence. So, put that one out. If you live in a society where violence is considered normalized or violence is utilized, then what tends to happen is you see that violence throughout society. So if we're willing to cane prisoners, then potentially you might be willing to smack children, or you maybe tolerate a certain amount of violence at home or in domestic settings. In other words, if you have a culture where violence is sometimes seen as a good thing, then some people might bring that into their home situation. So, in other words, if society is violent, then violence can be everywhere. And then prison separates the offenders from society, reducing the risk of further harm. So we don't need to be hitting or punching people or whipping people. That would be broadly the argument. Then the against argument, well, let's just look at the eye-watering numbers. So prisons are expensive. And this is just the facts that I could get from 21 to 22. It takes a long time for these numbers to be worked out. But basically, if you put someone in prison, they cost £4,000 a month. So that's almost £50,000 a year. Now, if we think about the fact that we put lots of people in prison, that means that that £4,000 a month that goes to putting that person into prison can't be used on schools, can't be used on hospitals, can't be used on roads, can't be used on playgrounds. We're using a huge amount of money to keep people in prison. And so we're also oversubscribed. There are too many people and not enough places. So essentially, we're still at the stage where we need to either build more prisons or potentially think of alternatives. Now, the challenge is the more prisons you build, the more expensive they are. The numbers keep going up and up and up and up and up. Now, let's just get that there. 1 minute, sorry, let me just, there we go. So I've given us a chunk of information here. So if we just start with the paragraph above, when someone goes to prison, their partner or their children are left behind, so they may lose their income, meaning their families can't pay rent or bills. This could lead to homelessness or needing benefits or housing from the government. Children might be bullied and struggle in school or grow up without one parent. So even though only one person has committed the crime, many others will get hurt as well. So, in other words, we're talking about the fact that if you put someone in prison, you don't just punish them, you punish their family. Whereas if you used maybe corporal punishment or capital punishment, or if you think back to the lesson you did on community service, if you gave people an alternative to prison, doesn't have to be corporal punishment or capital punishment, it could be community service, then you don't take them away from their family, they don't lose their job, and therefore their family can, remain a unit, and also you can continue to have an employment. You can continue to have a job. So corporal punishment. Why do some people think, well, we should just get on with corporal punishment instead of using prison? Well, it's easy. It's quick. It's clear. And just to make that point again, it's fairer on the families. So if you've committed a crime, then if you go to prison, your whole family suffers. But if you get whipped, or you get whipped or lashed 100 times, well, that can be done on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, and then you go back to work Monday. In other words, your family don't lose out on you, and don't lose out on employment. So let's put it this way: if someone's parent is sent to prison for 5 years, how might this affect the rest of their family? Now, I've put this question here because you might want to use it in your 12 marker. In other words, it's a nice way of sort of saying, well, actually, what effect does prison have if we put people in prison on their wider family? You can play with that idea. Okay. All right. Moving on. All right. That line's not straight. Let me fix that. There we go. And put that one here. Here are your quotes. Now, I do feel I'm moving at a little bit of a quick pace, but then we're doing revision and we've already had a lesson on corporal punishment and we've already had a lesson on capital punishment. So a lot of the information that I'm giving you is information that you've already kind of gone over. So you've got your other notes and you've got your other answers to lean on. Now, here are your quotes from the Bible. about why that are for using prison and not using other forms of maybe more nasty punishment. You know, two of them. I've just highlighted the first one because it says, I was in prison and you visited me. Now, that comes from the parable of the sheep and the goats, and you've often heard it said, I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. Well, this is one of those little sort of sentences. I was in prison and you visited me. In other words, Christians are encouraged to go and visit those in prison and help them. So it's a sort of, it goes along the idea of reformation, it goes along the idea of why potentially people could do with love and support, even if they've done the wrong thing, even if they're in prison. The Quran, there's plenty of quotes to support sort of being merciful as well and using prison over other forms of punishment. You've got them here, and you have seen these before. These are all quotes we've used in our previous homework. So we're not going to go over them. You've already had those given to you. If you've missed a homework, well, actually, you should never have missed homework, so you haven't missed it. And then over on this side, I've got these quotes here. Let's just put that line in straight. So you've got these quotes here: cut off the hands of thieves, slash them 100 times. I've got the quote, do not take a life except by just, due right, sorry, and an eye for an eye. Those are the quotes that say, actually, it's okay to use physical punishments. So you've got your fors and you've got your againsts. Now, ultimately, this is what you need to construct your 12 marker, because the question is over here, the best way to deal with criminals, sorry, prison is the best way to deal with criminals. And you've got for and you've got against. You've got loads of information here that will really help you out. But that last, let me just go back here, that last bit here, reach a justified conclusion. Okay, this is where the 12 markers are lost and won. So you've done all the good stuff. You've explained two sides of the argument. You've picked what you want to talk about. Now you've got to do your conclusion. State your own view. Now, this is where you see why I do everything typed. I don't often handwrite on this app. So there we go. So, do you think prison is the best way to deal with criminals? You can go yes, no. Don't make this overcomplicated. Yes, it is because, no, it isn't because. But explain and justify your point of view, please. Okay. Refer to the religious teachings that you think give the best side of the argument. Conclude. Say, actually, on the whole, prisons are too expensive, they're overcrowded, and they're ineffective because reoffending rates are so, so high. I'll just write that down there for you a second. That actually reoffending rates are 48%. That is a four, I promise. I'm going to do that again. So reoffending rates are, let's just fix that. There we go. Reoffending rates are 48%. So 48% of people go back to prison. So if you're going to say that prison doesn't work, you've got that information there. It really helps your argument. Now, on the flip side, actually, do we really want to live in a violent society where we can justify hitting people, lashing people, cutting people's hands off? If you live in that society, then the argument is that you encourage violence in other elements of society. If you allow it in one place, you might allow it in another. Also, prison does work if it's funded properly. If we think about our Clink program, actually, if it's the right program, it can really make a huge difference. Now it's down to you. Write your 12 marker. I haven't told you whether to say Christians or Muslims are for or against this one. It's for you to decide how you want to label it, how you want to write it. You've done the stuff on capital punishment and corporal punishment, so this should be fairly straightforward. Okay. Word count, aim for 300 to 400 words. Okay. I know that sounds a lot, but it really isn't once you get going. Okay. So enjoy. Good luck.